I've been quietly impressed by indie titles the last few years. After a decade or so of 2D throwbacks, technology has finally caught up and given people the chance to make 3D retro titles in the manner of the 90s onwards, so that yes, you too could wake up and start coding a whole Crash Bandicoot in your bedroom. Or Bubsy, I guess. Is that where we are? Maybe that's not impressive to those of you under 20, but to me this stuff is like magic. Actual punishable witchcraft, and the best part of it is that, now it's so ubiquitous, it's raised the bar. It's not enough to be able to achieve this look. We know you can do it, but does the game behind the aesthetic hit differently? Does it impress outside the look? Does it have something to say? Well, it doesn't have to, but you know how I am. It's a standard I've been hoping to find since this became a thing, and in 2024, that standard was met, if not surpassed, by a game that felt like it came out of nowhere, and one I can comfortably call my new favourite. It's funny that this is also optimistic, because it concerns a game that, well, isn't that way. Not exactly. Crow Country feels like a landmark moment in the indie space. It's an impressive enough effort by the Vian Brothers, quite a lot of the work done almost by Adam alone, and it was getting its flowers just for the vibe captured in the trailers. As a whole though, I don't think it's appreciated enough for how ingeniously devised it really is, how tightly conceptualized not as a gimmicky retro experience, but something else, stating a case through every facet of how it's been created, in a way that, ironically, could only really have happened in the 2020s. My playthrough may have only lasted a few short hours, but I spent a very long time after the fact thinking over everything it was doing, and in the end, I was happy to finally place this in my own imaginary Hall of Fame. But then, of course I did, didn't I? They said it in a goddamn theme park. I'm, not that complicated. Mara Forrest, an incredibly young special agent, travels to a once famous abandoned theme park, Crow Country, looking for its creator, Edward Crow. Funny that. In the hope of uncovering an initially vague mystery, slowly realizing something sinister has taken place inside of its child-friendly walls. Things play out in the manner of a retro survival horror, specifically Resident Evil or Silent Hill, reminiscent in how those games were structured or how they felt to play, using a tank control adjacent setup as you solve puzzles, and on occasion, try not to incur the wrath of anything out of the ordinary. Yeah, like that. Already, the setting lends itself incredibly well to video game logic. Theme parks, since Disney's day, have always been laid out as thematically tailored interactive experiences, with a hub world connecting branching paths to genre-based areas to explore at your leisure, designed within an inch of their lives to keep you immersed and engaged. It syncs up with a lot of things I value generally in games. I'm a big fan of kitchen sink theory, which is not creating an enormous open world of repeating assets and actions, but a limited space that's been thoroughly designed and polished. It's a term I picked up from Warren Spector, and I'll be honest, I really wish he followed his own advice when he gave this a go. Maybe I'll talk about that, it's been a while. That design philosophy is extremely well demonstrated in Crow Country, where literally every nook and cranny of that park has been realised, featuring consistent moments of engagement at every turn, dealing with enemies while scavenging for resources and solving the huge amount of fiendishly clever puzzles littered throughout the place. Nothing here is relatively difficult. You're usually given just enough in any room to figure out exactly what needs to be done, but the beauty is in how you always feel satisfied by the answers, that you were smart enough to understand what the game wanted, and that it made sense both by the metrics of real life and within its own logic. I think this might actually be my favourite consistent approach to puzzles in a video game like ever. The first time since replaying the original Monkey Island that had me making notes on paper in real life, trying to keep track of numbers and ideas across different rooms that correlate to each other, or unpicking certain word and number codes. One puzzle which speaks to its cleverness is a trivia machine in the arcade room, offering general knowledge questions you have to answer by the standards of the 90s. Talk about knowing your audience. It's indicative of the creator's approach to game design at large. Tom and Adam, already having developed a few titles of different stripes now, clearly have a love for old games beyond a nostalgic appreciation for any one aspect. Adam's Twitter page regularly demonstrated his thought process going into the design, from the aesthetics to the puzzles, often citing older titles in ways that showed he was really trying to unpack their logic and explored why they felt like they worked for him. And I'll be real with you, Adam, those notes would make a hell of a book. I'd buy it. It's apparent they wanted not just to do a tribute or clone of old survival horrors. The blending of elements from many other games, including the aesthetic of Final Fantasy VII's non-combat scenarios, showing a desire to create a game that captured the general vibe of the era. I'm coming to appreciate when a game captures that and feels like a quintessential new experience that would be made for a specific console, which stops them feeling like rip-offs and very much more like games that could have come out at that time. Cavern of Dreams, another great game I played last year, was a much much less lucid experience, obviously. It was more about solving puzzles however you wanted and character designs that were loose and freeform. It captured not just the experience of dreams, but playing games on the N64, which were less tangibly specific, while Crow Country feels like a distillation of the more logical, angular material often found on the PS1, and I think both really paid attention to the general library of those consoles to capture those differences. Crow Country really is a game about specifics.
Fish people.
You can see that almost perverse level of attention to detail from the start, the visuals close enough to what it's emulating while deviating just enough to be its own beast. And the same can be said for the mechanics, which are just shy of stiff, all to the benefit of capturing the idea of what its predecessors felt like in the era they came out in. I've never been a fan of the idea that controls in older games are begging to be updated to the same over-the-shoulder system we see again and again. The original Resident Evil control scheme may not have intended to feel particularly unintuitive, and Lord knows I'm just not very coordinated, but I appreciate the effect this had, and still has on those who played the game at the time, how it added to a tension that encouraged the player to lock in during do-or-die situations. It created a feeling, intended or not, that inspired that generation to think about games differently. Crow Country takes its inspiration from that effect for its own benefit, capturing that same tension with just enough tweaks to feel like you can easily adapt and improve as a player, and I prefer that to throwing out the system completely in the name of progress. I do agree with the criticism that there was no melee weapon, which would have overcome the perhaps overabundant sprinkling of ammo. I mean, I never felt too worried about running out. Last I heard, they were working on a hard mode patch, which possibly may alleviate exactly that for the people who want that experience. Worth mentioning, there's actually a whole other version of the game you can play without enemy encounters, that allows you to explore like a point-and-click adventure, with dialogue changing to suit, and the gun now just another tool to solve puzzles with. Absolutely ups the replay value quite a bit. This all makes for a very good game, but what sets it apart is how it's all conceptualized. Crow Country tied absolutely everything it's doing together in a way I haven't appreciated since Psychonauts, and I think it embodies everything I've ever said about creative syntax. The principle where everything a game is doing, from the art to the controls, sells a coherent concept or point of view, which this game does so damn well. One of my gripes with an earlier retro 3D attempt, Hat in Time, was that it was technically impressive, but didn't feel like it had that much to say to me about being a retro experience specifically. Now, you gotta make stuff for yourself, it'll mean something to someone, and it was games like this that kinda got us here, and I don't think I did a perfect job of detailing my personal issues at the time, but on a replay it stood out even more as feeling a little insecure, sort of doing everything in a vague attempt to impress a very 2010s internet landscape. Probably still sounds kinda harsh to some of you, and I know these two games aren't like for like, so don't take it too personally, but if you're looking for what I prefer, it was Crow Country's approach, and its way of using its creative choices as a retro title to state its case, which had me compelled from beginning to end. It was Susie who said it best. This thing is deeply confident in how it tells its story.
Almost as if the game itself expects you to know what's going on as you uncover things.
You've got a creative floor of incredibly appealing ideas in its retro visuals, well-written story, characters, and overall setting and vibe, but you also hit the creative ceiling, where these, all on closer scrutiny, manage to impart a clear message about humanity in the 2020s, compelling me to piece together the truth of the matter every step of the way with a wonderfully constructed plot that, on occasion, made me snort. Do skip ahead if you haven't finished yet, I really think you should see the ending for yourself first. Let's see, we have Crow Country itself, a theme park, an idealized, man-made structure, designed to present a world better than it actually is, now populated by creatures suggesting it might have led to something bad after all. There are constant references to incidents that have occurred inside the park and hidden rooms alluding to another reason it exists the public isn't aware of. One much more depressingly self-interested. Another set of references are to real-world disasters, many centered around other man-made structures that caused enormous numbers of casualties, and the discovery that this number refers not to a code in the game, but a year. The final clue that can only be checked at a very specific point at the game's end, in a moment easily missed, shows the monsters are people arriving from another point in time, also trying to escape a terrible reality, only to be utterly changed for the worst in the process, not unlike what happened when you chose to visit years ago. I don't think there's a lack of a future land to hint at the possibility of a sequel. I think its absence poses a deliberate question that represents the entire game's ideology, which is, What future? It's all about comfort, trying to find shelter and happiness in the face of an unsatisfying reality, and failing. So incredibly woven through the game's design, and even the choice of making the game a retro throwback at all. The fact we've started using terms like cozy games, something applying to retro products that represent perhaps a better point in your own life growing up, could even be applied to elements of this game, which jar against the chilling enemy designs and moral questions strewn throughout the puzzles, reminding us of a reality outside the game's life. That use of its own physicality to tell a story, why it has to be a game and not a movie or a book, is what elevates Crow Country to a next level experience for me, and I feel like I've been waiting for an indie game to really capitalize on that and not just trying to recreate past success through new technology. This definitely does that. I had one or two reservations, but really just over minor things that are totally take it or leave it points. I loved and understood the game's message as a whole, but there were one or two details that felt overcomplicated or untrue of human behavior, with a few of the characters feeling rather tangential, and only one character allowed to be wholly unlikable. I think Silent Hill does marginally better at making its B-plot matter by comparison. The optional bosses are a great touch, but don't really have anything major to say about the story and just their designs alone as bigger versions of existing enemies. It felt like a missed opportunity. Unless I'm missing something, I very well might be. The final boss is cool, but mechanically is less like the rest of the game and more like Spyro the Dragon. Felt like another puzzle hybrid right at the end would have been the better option. And you know, for a game called Crow Country, I did think, as cliched as it might sound, we'd have earned some iconic crow imagery in that final encounter that we didn't get. I know this isn't a game going for the most obvious answers, but sometimes it's kind of satisfying to make a really subversive, profoundly different experience, and then maybe give us a little of what we want by the end. Just a tiny taste, just at the last minute, but you know, it doesn't matter. This is all, as I said, take it or leave it advice. Looking at the game in hindsight, and certainly not anything I'm holding over the active production of just bringing this thing to life, which they did brilliantly. If I'm still talking and thinking about something so long down the line, chances are it did what it needed to. I even went to a wedding and started recommending it to everyone there. No sponsorship or anything, what can I say? The romance took hold. What a charming guy, said no one. I think this is one of many signs of change in the indie space, which has risen in popularity of sales and public presence, but now I think absolutely in quality as well. I've seen and played titles that have felt like the scene is on a roll, no longer about one big indie title everyone's talking about, but a handful of exciting AA projects coming out fast from loads of new creators and hitting the bullseye, with way more exciting new ideas than I anticipated. Really though, I just hope the lessons of what these games are doing are taken the way the Vian Brothers took from the games they were inspired by. I've kvetched so much in the past about the worry we're falling into the traps of bloated AAA experiences, or reboots and remakes, and what we really need to be doing is what we did in the AA era, making new experiences on the shoulders of what we learned from the past, and that is starting to take shape again in the indie space quite seriously. Perhaps the greatest joy is seeing these games prove what I always believed, that old graphical styles are not just about recreating nostalgia, but evergreen aesthetic choices that can convey ideas the way any aesthetic does in any medium, giving us a greater palette of expression that the technology now offers artists without billions of dollars in the bank. These titles were fresh and exciting, and continued to surprise me in an age where I think we can be fooled into thinking we've seen it all before, and I cannot wait to see what else gets made that can make me feel this way again. I'm sure the Vian Brothers can do that, if this is anything to go by, certainly. It's so good. It's so uplifting to say it's so good. And that, well, it kinda scares me.